Welcome to Bemanda Podcast, your frontline source for smart, sharp, and straight talk on IT trends, tech truths, and digital transformation. Here is today's podcast in English.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We are your guides, ready to help you navigate through stacks of information, pull out those crucial nuggets, and hopefully leave you feeling genuinely well-informed.
That's the plan.
Today, we're getting into a tool that sits right at the heart of collaboration in so many places, SharePoint.
It really does. You see it everywhere.
And for this deep dive, we've really been digging into the Bemanda Technology SharePoint Deep Dive course material.
Yep, that's our foundation for today.
So our mission really is for you, especially if you're maybe just starting out with SharePoint, maybe feeling a bit overwhelmed by it.
Which happens, it can look like a lot at first glance.
Exactly. We want to cut through that confusion, give you a really solid foundation based on this Bemanda material. What is it? Why should you care? What are the absolute must-know bits to get started?
Think of it as your essential primer.
Your primer, yeah. Powered by the insights from the course material.
Right. Because, SharePoint can seem daunting. There's a lot of terminology, lots of features. Mm-hmm. But underneath it all, it's really designed to make working together smoother, make managing all that digital stuff more efficient.
Right.
So understanding these fundamentals we've pulled from the course, it should really help demystify your digital workspace, make you feel a bit more confident navigating it.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this. So stepping right back, absolute basics. How does the Bemanda course material actually define SharePoint? What is it fundamentally?
Fundamentally, the material defines SharePoint as a web-based platform. That's key. It's for collaboration and for managing information.
Web-based platform, okay.
Yeah, think of it like a secure central spot, a hub in your company's, digital world. It's where teams can store stuff, share it, organize all their digital content.
Content like what? Just files?
Well, files, yes. Documents are a huge part of it, but also data, news, announcements, almost anything digital, really. It's meant to be that central repository.
Okay, a central hub makes sense, but is it just like a big shared drive, just dumping files somewhere?
No, not at all. And that's a really key takeaway from the course material. It's a platform.
Platform, what does that mean in this context?
It means you can build on it. The material specifically points out that you can use SharePoint to build actual business applications.
Applications, like software?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
Often using what they call low-code or even no-code tools.
Okay, hang on. No code. That sounds interesting for someone who isn't a developer.
Exactly. For a beginner, or just an average business user, this means you potentially have the power to customize your team's workspace.
How so?
Well, maybe set up a simple system, like tracking project requests that come in, or managing the steps for onboarding a new team member, things like that.
Without needing to call IT or a developer?
Potentially, yes, for simpler things. That's the power. It makes SharePoint much more dynamic than just, a static file server. Mm-hmm. It can adapt to your team's specific needs.
That no-code or low-code aspect really does sound empowering for everyday users. Okay, what about accessing it? You said web-based. Do I need special software installed on my computer?
Nope. And that's another really important point. The material stresses accessibility.
Good.
Once your IT team has it all set up, all you really need is a modern web browser. Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Safari, whatever you use.
That's it.
That's it. You can log in securely and access your team's SharePoint site from, pretty much any device, your laptop, tablet, maybe even your phone, depending on how it's set up.
Yeah.
Anywhere you have internet.
So it's designed to be right there, easily reachable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right in your browser, probably alongside all the other web tools you use daily.
Okay. So for you listening, if you're just starting out, maybe the first step, drawing from the material, is simple but really crucial. Try to define SharePoint in your own words.
Yeah, internalize it.
Right. It's secure, it's accessible, it's web-based, a central place for your team's information and collaboration.
Don't forget the platform part.
And yes, remember, it's also a platform you can build on, even without code sometimes. Get that core idea down.
That's a great starting point.
Okay, so we know what it is conceptually. Now, how does it actually do all this stuff? The Bemanda course material talks about these core building blocks. They frame them as pillars.
Mm-hmm. The pillars.
How do these pillars help us understand the different capabilities?
Well, the material uses these pillars. I think it lists sites, communities, content, search, insights, and compositions, basically to represent the main functional areas of SharePoint. what it does.
6 pillars. Okay, that's quite a few. Where should a beginner focus?
Right. For someone new, 2 of those pillars are absolutely fundamental. They're what you'll interact with constantly, day to day. That's sites and content.
Sites and content. Got it. Let's break those down. Start with sites.
Okay, sites. The course material describes sites as the primary workspaces. They are effectively the containers where everything else lives inside SharePoint.
So when I log in, I'm probably looking at a site.
Almost certainly, yes. You'll typically land on some kind of site. Maybe it's your specific team site, maybe a site dedicated to a project you're on, or it could even be the main company intranet homepage, which is often built on SharePoint.
Okay.
Sites are where you actually create the space to store things, organize them, share them with others. Think of a site as your team's dedicated virtual office space within the larger SharePoint environment.
A virtual office. I like that. Okay, so sites are the places. What about content? That was the other key pillar.
Right. Content. This pillar is all about managing the actual information, the stuff you put into those sites.
Like the documents we mentioned.
Exactly. Documents are a primary example. But it's also about how you manage them. This is where the material highlights key features, like obviously adding documents, but also working together on them, collaboration, and crucially, version control.
Version control. Let's pause there. That sounds important.
Oh, it's huge. The course material really emphasizes this, and for good reason. If you've ever lived through that nightmare scenario.
Which nightmare? Multiple versions of a file flying around.
Exactly. Multiple people emailing different versions of a Word doc. Nobody knows which one is the actual latest version. Comments are lost. It's chaos.
Been there, definitely.
SharePoint's version control, built into the content pillar, is designed to solve that completely.
Yeah.
When you save your document in a SharePoint site library.
A library. We'll get to that term later.
We will, yes.
Yeah.
It's where documents live within a site. But when you save it there, SharePoint can automatically keep track of every single change.
Every change.
Yep. Who made the change and when they made it. It creates a history for the document.
So you can see who did what.
Precisely. And even better, if someone makes a mistake, or you need to refer back to an earlier draft, you can often view or even restore those previous versions.
Wow, okay. That's not just a neat feature. That sounds like a fundamental shift.
It really is. It brings reliability and transparency to managing shared documents. For you as a beginner, just knowing that your document's history is automatically being tracked, it takes a huge weight off your shoulders. No more final V2 actually final JD's edits.
Ha! Yes, we've all seen those file names. Okay, and what about the real-time collaboration, the material mentioned under content?
Right, that's another big part of it, especially with SharePoint Online. When a document lives in SharePoint, often multiple people can open and edit that same document at the same time.
Simultaneously?
Yes. Usually using the Office web apps like Word or Excel in your browser, or sometimes even the full desktop apps if they're connected correctly. You can literally see where your colleagues are typing or making edits in real time.
That sounds much better than locking a file.
Oh, absolutely. It transforms teamwork. No more waiting for someone else to close a document before you can add your bit. It's much more fluid.
Okay. Sites are the places, content is the stuff, and how we manage it, like versioning and co-authoring. You mentioned search as another pillar earlier. That seems pretty vital, too.
Incredibly vital. The search pillar is your key to finding everything once it's in SharePoint.
Everything.
Well, everything you have permission to see, of course. But yeah, it allows you to quickly find documents, data that might be stored in lists, another structure we'll touch on, news articles, internal announcements, and importantly, even people within your organization who might have relevant expertise.
So it searches more than just file names.
Oh yeah, much more. It usually searches the content inside documents too. If the information exists somewhere in SharePoint that you can access, search is designed to help you uncover it. The material kind of implies that mastering basic search is crucial for a beginner trying to navigate what might be a large amount of information.
Makes sense. Findability is key. Now, what about those other pillars the material mentioned? Communities, insights, compositions. Are they important for beginners?
They are definitely part of the broader SharePoint platform, and they add significant value. Communities often relates to social features, like discussion forums or corporate social networking aspects. Insights is more about analytics, usage data, trends, that sort of thing. And compositions involves building more complex solutions, maybe integrating different systems.
So less about day-to-day document work for a newbie.
Generally, yes. While they contribute to the overall power and flexibility of SharePoint, you won't typically be interacting directly or deeply with communities, insights, or compositions when you're just starting out focusing on basic team collaboration and managing your files.
So the advice is?
Focus on mastering sites and content first. Get comfortable with where things are, sites, and how to work with the information itself, content, including using search effectively. The other pillars might become relevant later, but start with the foundations.
Okay, solid advice. So a suggestion for you trainees listening, really spend some time clicking around, explore the different sites you have access to, try to identify where documents and files are stored that leads us back to content.
Practical exploration.
Yeah. If you have permission, try adding a test document, maybe make a small edit to it. Then look for that version history feature we talked about. See how it tracked your change.
That hands-on interaction really makes the concepts stick, much better than just reading about them.
Definitely. Okay, so we've got a handle on what SharePoint is and its key functions through pillars like sites and content. Now, the material also gets into where SharePoint actually, well, lives, because companies have different options, right?
That's right. It's not just one single thing. The course material outlines the 3 main deployment models, the main ways organizations use SharePoint.
And those are?
SharePoint Online, SharePoint On-Premises, and a mix called Hybrid.
Okay, SharePoint Online, that sounds like cloud.
Exactly. That's the big one these days. SharePoint Online is where Microsoft hosts the entire SharePoint service for you in their cloud infrastructure. It's usually bundled as part of a Microsoft 365 subscription.
So my company uses Microsoft 365. We likely have SharePoint Online.
Very likely, yes. The big advantages the material points out for online are things like automatic updates. Microsoft handles all the patching and new features. There's less maintenance burden on your own company's IT team.
That sounds convenient.
It is. And critically, it offers really seamless integration with all the other Microsoft 365 services.
Like you mentioned, Teams and OneDrive.
Precisely. They're designed to work together closely. For instance, when you share files within a Microsoft Teams channel, behind the scenes, those files are actually being stored in a dedicated SharePoint site associated with that team.
Ah, okay. I didn't realize that connection.
Yeah, it's tightly woven. And your OneDrive for Business, the place you store your personal work files, that's essentially your own personal SharePoint library in the cloud.
Interesting. Okay, so that's online. What about on-premises? That sounds like the opposite.
It is. SharePoint on-premises is the more traditional model. This is where the organization itself installs, manages, and maintains the SharePoint software on its own servers inside its own data center.
Why would a company choose that way? More work for them, isn't it?
It can be. But the material notes the key benefit is maximum control. Full control over customization, over server configurations, over data governance and security, sometimes specific industry regulations or complex integrations with existing internal systems might necessitate keeping things on premises.
Okay, so control is the trade-off for convenience.
Largely, yes. And the third option, hybrid.
Is that just mixing them?
Essentially, yes. Hybrid deployment is a blend of both worlds. An organization might keep some sensitive data or specific applications running on their own SharePoint on-premises servers, but they also use SharePoint Online for other functions, maybe for broader collaboration or to leverage cloud features like integration with Teams. It allows a phased move to the cloud or a permanent mixed state.
Gotcha. So 3 options, but for most beginners listening today, the Bemanda material suggests they're probably interacting with
SharePoint Online, especially if your organization is invested in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. That's the most common scenario now for new implementations and for many existing users.
Right. And the material highlights specific features in SharePoint Online that are really geared towards that modern collaboration idea, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It mentions things like those team sites we talked about, perfect for project work and close-knit team collaboration. Then there are communication sites, which are designed more for broadcasting information broadly, like company news or HR updates.
Team sites for doing work, communication sites for sharing info?
Kind of, yeah. And then, of course, all those content features we discussed, the real-time document co-authoring, the robust version control, and that vital integration piece, how SharePoint Online talks to Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, and especially Teams. That interconnectedness is a huge part of the online experience.
Okay, so here's another suggestion for you. The trainee, especially if you are using SharePoint Online. Start paying attention to how it connects with the other Microsoft 365 tools you use every day.
Good point. Notice the links.
Yeah. When you save a file from Word, where does it default to? Does it suggest your OneDrive or a Team site? When you click the Files tab in a Teams channel, notice how it looks and feels kind of like SharePoint.
Because it is SharePoint underneath.
Right. Understanding those connections, seeing how the tools flow together, that's really key to getting a smooth workflow going. Don't think of them as totally separate things.
They're designed to be parts of a whole system.
Exactly. Okay, now let's talk about navigating within SharePoint. Finding your way around. Understanding the basic structure seems crucial. The course material introduces some terminology here about the hierarchy.
It does. It describes a potentially quite detailed hierarchy, farms, web applications, etc. But honestly, for a beginner, for a typical end user, you really only need to grasp the parts you'll directly interact with inside a site.
Keep it practical. Good. So what are those key parts?
Okay, so at the highest level you'll usually encounter as a user is the site itself. We talked about that, the workspace. Sometimes you might hear the term site collection, which is technically a group of related sites managed together, but often you'll just think about the specific site you're working in.
So site is the main container, I see.
Pretty much. Now, inside that site, you have the places where the actual information is stored and organized. The two most common and important ones you need to know are libraries and lists.
Libraries and lists. Okay, what's the difference? This seems important.
It's fundamental, and the material is quite clear on this. Libraries are specifically for documents. Think files. Your Word docs, your Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, images, PowerPoint presentations, anything that's essentially a file goes into a library.
Okay, library files, got it. What about lists then?
Lists are for structured data. Think rows and columns, almost like a simple database table or a spreadsheet within SharePoint itself, but not for storing the spreadsheet file.
Structured data, like what?
Yeah.
Give me some examples.
Okay. Common uses for lists are things like tracking tasks for a project who's assigned, due date, status, or maintaining a list of contacts for a team, maybe a calendar of important team events, tracking issues or bugs, or even just simple lists of links to useful resources.
So data points, information you'd maybe track in rows?
Exactly. It's information about things organized in a structured way rather than the files themselves. That's the core distinction. Libraries for files, lists for structured data items.
Library for files, list for data. Okay, I think I've got that.
Good. And the actual things you put into them have names too, according to the material.
Yeah.
The files you put in libraries are typically just called documents. The entries, the rows you put into lists, those are called items.
Documents and libraries, items and lists, simple enough.
Right. And one more piece. How do you actually see all this stuff? When you navigate to a site in your browser, what you're looking at is a page.
A web page, basically.
Exactly. SharePoint pages are what you interact with visually. They display the information from your site. And these pages are built using smaller components called web parts.
Web parts, like building blocks.
That's a great way to think of them. The material describes web parts as modular elements, like little mini apps, that you can add onto a page to show specific content or provide functionality.
Examples.
Sure. You might have a web part on your team's homepage that displays the latest news announcements. Another web part could show a list of recent documents from a specific library. Maybe a web part showing upcoming events from a team calendar list. Or one that embeds a video. They're the building blocks that make SharePoint pages dynamic and useful, pulling information from your libraries and lists and displaying it.
Okay, let me try that analogy we touched on earlier. See if this helps tie it together based on the material.
Go for it.
Let's say the site is like your team's physical office space.
Okay.
The library is the big filing cabinet in the corner where you keep all your paper documents.
Makes sense. Files in the cabinet.
The list is like the shared whiteboard on the wall, or maybe a shared logbook or spreadsheet where you track team tasks or maybe customer contacts.
Right. Structured information visible to the team.
The documents are the actual files inside that filing cabinet. The items are the individual lines written on the whiteboard or the rows in the logbook.
Yep. Following you.
And the page is like the main wall of the office itself. And on that wall, you can pin different things. Those are the web parts. You might pin up a section of the whiteboard, a list view web part. Maybe you put a little window showing the contents of one drawer of the filing cabinet, a document library web part, or maybe a corkboard for recent memos, a news web part.
That's a really good analogy. I think that helps connect the terminology sites, libraries, lists, documents, items, pages, web parts to something more tangible, something people can visualize based on how the material defines them.
Hopefully. So final suggestion for trainees here, really focus on navigation within the sites you use. Actively try to identify, is this a library I'm looking at or is it a list? What kind of information does each one hold?
Notice the difference in how they look and behave.
Exactly. And again, if you have permissions, try it out. Upload a test file to a library. Then find a list somewhere and try adding a new item. Just doing that once or twice makes the difference between libraries for files and lists for data items much clearer. It's fundamental for organizing your work.
Absolutely. Crucial distinction to grasp early on.
Okay. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground drawing from that Bemanda technology course material. We've talked about what SharePoint is, that web-based platform for collaboration and info management, plus building stuff. We hit the core pillars, really focusing on sites, the places, and content, the stuff and its management, like versioning.
And the different ways it can live online, on-premises, hybrid.
Right. And then we just broke down that basic structure you interact with every day. Sites containing libraries for documents and lists for items, all displayed on pages using web parts.
That's a pretty solid overview of the fundamentals covered in the material.
So let's zoom back out. We've gone through all these concepts. What does understanding all this actually mean for you, the listener, the beginner, maybe starting a new job or project using SharePoint? Why does this matter day to day?
Well, the material consistently points back to the practical user-level benefits. Understanding this stuff means you can work more effectively with your colleagues, right? Using those collaboration features instead of emailing files back and forth.
Less email chaos. Always good.
Definitely. It means finally having confidence about where the latest version of an important document actually lives, thanks to centralized libraries and that version control.
No more hunting.
Peace of mind.
Exactly.
It means being able to find information, whether it's a policy document, project update, or a contact much more quickly using search, instead of wasting time digging through confusing shared drive folders or old emails.
Efficiency, basically.
Yeah, fundamentally, it's about making teamwork and sharing information more efficient, less frustrating, and ultimately more productive. It's designed to help manage the digital side of work better.
So it helps turn that feeling of drowning in digital information, that overload, into something more organized, accessible, and useful for you and your team. A shared brain, almost.
That's a good way to put it. A structured, shared workspace for knowledge.
And that brings us towards the end of this deep dive into SharePoint fundamentals, guided specifically by the insights from the Bemanda Technology SharePoint Deep Dive course material. We defined it, explored sites and content, looked at online versus on-premises, and unpacked those key structures: sites, libraries, lists, documents, items.
Getting comfortable with those core concepts, really understanding the difference between a library and a list, knowing that sites are your main workspaces, realizing search is your friend, that's your absolute priority as a beginner.
It's the foundation.
It really is. It's the solid base that will make all your future learning and day-to-day interaction with SharePoint so much easier and more intuitive. Master these basics first.
All right. So let's leave you with a final thought to mull over, something drawing from the material's picture of SharePoint as this dynamic platform. Not just storage. How does shifting your perspective viewing SharePoint not just as a place to dump files, but as an organized, collaborative, searchable, and even potentially customizable workspace? How might that change the way you approach your digital workflow, your team projects, maybe even starting tomorrow?
We are jumping right back into our exploration of SharePoint.
That's right. Yeah, we're using Bemanda Technology's SharePoint Deep Dive course material as our guide again.
And in the first part, we kind of set the stage, right? Looked at SharePoint on-prem versus online, the evolution.
Yeah, the history, the core admin stuff sites, users, backups, restores the real nuts and bolts for both worlds.
So with that background, now we can really dig into how people are using SharePoint online, like day to day. This course material has some great insights on 3 areas that keep coming up.
Absolutely. We're going to unpack that whole modern flat structure versus the classic hierarchy people might be used to.
Okay.
Then dive into how SharePoint is used to build intranets, those internal company portals.
Right, the communication hub.
Exactly. And finally, tackle the big one, permissions and security. You just can't talk about SharePoint without getting into that.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
All right, let's start with intranets. The material talks about a corporate portal or intranet. What exactly are we talking about here?
Well, Think of it as the main gateway for your company's internal information. The course calls it the essential first stop for employees needing business info.
So more than just a simple website.
Oh, much more. It's totally different from a public site because it's tailored around internal business processes, your specific needs.
Okay.
And the info there, it has to be secure, obviously, kept up to date, and easy for you to find no matter where you are, maybe even across different regions. It's about getting people the info they need.
And SharePoint Online is positioned as the platform to build this on.
Yeah, pretty much the central hub. Even if some data lives elsewhere, like on old file shares or in other systems, the SharePoint Internet becomes that main starting point. You land there first.
The material mentions it plays a lot of roles, wears different hats.
It really does. It's your internal comm site, sure, but also a collaboration space, a showcase for company culture. It's basically the foundation of your digital workplace. A good one really helps engagement.
And it breaks down what makes one successful. What are the key parts?
Several key things. First, communication. That's news, navigation, links, maybe promotions, keeping people looped in.
The front page stuff.
Right. Then, content. This is where departments like HR or legal or IT offer their services. Think finding vacation policies, benefits info, maybe grabbing a standard NDA template.
Like an internal service center.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Then actions and activities links for things like time tracking, expense reports, approval workflows, quick access to tasks.
Makes sense.
Collaboration is huge, providing spaces for teams or communities based on roles or topics, a place to share knowledge.
Getting people working together.
Yep. And culture sharing stories, maybe employee profiles, info about clubs, branding. Even the internet's name can reflect culture, like the grid example in Material.
Ah, right.
Mobility is essential now. It has to work on any device. And underpinning all of it, good search. If you can't find stuff, it doesn't matter how great it looks.
Yeah, search is always a challenge, especially with more and more content. The material notes that navigation design gets tricky in this new world of flat sites.
It really does. Knowing what you need versus knowing where it is, or if it even exists. It's a real design puzzle.
So how do you build this in SharePoint Online? What tools does the course highlight?
It points to a few core concepts. Hub sites and how you associate sites with them, getting site navigation right, using web parts to structure pages, and maybe building custom site designs.
Okay, let's take hub sites first. The connective tissue.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They bring organization to that modern flat structure. The idea now is, for better governance and growth, each team or project gets its own site collection. Hub sites link these related site collections together.
So not like the old way with nested subsites under subsites.
Exactly. Subsites were classic, but they could be a governance headache. Features applied collection-wide often mess things up unintentionally down the chain. The modern way is individual sites, and hubs provide that flexible structure over them.
Structure without being locked in.
That's the idea. The material says a good hub setup gives you three things: shared navigation and branding, so all connected sites look and feel related.
Consistency.
Right. Then, content roll-up, pulling news, events, documents from the associated sites together. And third, a main homepage for the hub itself. It lets you group things logically.
And site association is just joining a site to a hub.
Pretty much. You associate a site and it becomes part of that hub family. Now, the hub owner decides if that site actually shows up in the main hub navigation bar.
Ah, okay, so it's not automatic navigation.
No. But the content rollup is powerful. You can set web parts like news or highlighted content to pull info from all associated sites or just pick specific ones.
The material also mentioned hub-to-hub association for search.
Yeah, that's about widening the search net. You can link one hub to another. So when you search from any site connected in that chain, results can come back from the main hub, its associated hubs, and even hubs associated with those hubs, up to 3 levels deep for search.
Okay, helps find things across related areas. What about permissions with hubs? How does that work?
Good question. The material covers this. There's an option to sync hub permissions. If you turn this on, you can add specific people, or better yet, M365 groups or security groups, as visitors to all the sites associated with the hub.
Just visitors, though.
Right now, yes, that's a limitation mentioned. They only get visitor access through this sync. And there's a limit, currently 10 entries you can sync this way, which is why using groups is really recommended over individuals.
Got it. Any other catches with hub permissions?
Yeah, a few key things. Site owners don't have to enable the sync to join a hub. They can keep permissions totally separate if needed.
Okay, good.
Enabling the sync adds visitors. It doesn't touch existing permissions on the associated sites. Also, it can take up to 4 hours for the sync to actually happen.
Patience required.
A little, yeah. And if a site leaves the hub, those synced permissions get removed automatically. Most importantly, even if someone's added as a hub visitor, they still only see content on an associated site if they already have the right permissions on that site. The sync gives baseline access, but site permissions rule.
That's a really crucial distinction. Where do you manage that sync setting?
It's in the site settings menu, under site permissions. There's a specific hub section or pivot there.
Okay. Moving on to the navigation itself, what users actually click on?
Right. So the shared navigation, the bar you see at the very top across all associated sites, that's controlled by the hub site owner.
And their different styles.
Two main ones in modern SharePoint mentioned in the material. Cascading, which is the default drop-down style, works everywhere. And Mega Menu, which gives you those big multi-column drop-downs. That's supported on communication sites and is what hubs use for their shared nav. Not available on-prem, though.
And that shared hub nav is separate from the site's own navigation.
Exactly. You have the hub site global navigation at the top, consistent everywhere in the hub family. Then you have the current site navigation, which is just for the specific site you're on.
Makes sense. So you use web parts to actually build out the content on the pages within these sites.
Yep. They're the building blocks, drag and drop. The course highlights some common ones. News web part obvious for company news, announcements.
Standard.
Events web part shows upcoming calendar events. Pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Sites web part, this one's neat. It can automatically show sites associated with the hub or ones you've visited recently, or you can handpick specific sites to feature.
Candy for discovery.
Yeah. The hero web part, that's usually the big visual banner at the top of communication sites. You can feature up to 5 items with nice images, text, links, makes pages engaging.
Right, eye-catching.
And the highlighted content web part. Super flexible. It dynamically pulls content docs, pages, news based on filters you set, like recent documents across sites, or content tagged a certain way. Very powerful.
And related to showing specific content, audience targeting. How's that different from permissions?
Yeah, crucially different. This is a point that often trips people up. Audience targeting is about personalizing what shows up on a page for different groups. You can target, say, a news post or a navigation link or items in that highlighted content web part, so only people in specific M365 or security groups see it on that page.
So the item is still there? Someone could maybe find it via search if they have permission.
Exactly.
But it's just not cluttering up the page for people it's not relevant to.
Precisely. Permissions control if you can access it at all. Audience targeting controls if it's displayed to you on a specific page. Assuming you already have permission, it's for relevance, not security.
Okay, that clears it up. A way to tailor the view without messing with access rights.
You got it. Reduces noise.
All right, so that covers the main pieces of building an intranet with SharePoint Online, according to the material. Thinking about your own organization or ones you've worked with, what's one key element of a successful intranet communication, content, search, maybe culture that you feel is the most challenging part to really get right and keep going? Something for you, the listener, to ponder. That whole discussion about hubs and flat structures leads perfectly into our next topic. The big shift from that classic hierarchical SharePoint structure to the modern flat approach.
Right. The material makes sure to revisit the old model first, just for context, the one with the main site collection at the top.
And then subsites nested underneath, sometimes going down several levels, like a family tree for sites.
Exactly, the parent-child thing. Key features were that top-level site collection defining boundaries, and then subsites inheriting navigation, permissions maybe, or having unique ones broken lower down.
Yeah, that inheritance model seemed simpler on the surface for permissions.
It also offered consistent designs, supposedly organized content within each site boundary, limited search scope, and gave you that breadcrumb trail so you always knew where you were nested. It felt very structured, very top-down governance.
But the material points out it had some serious downsides.
Big time. Mainly in flexibility, moving things around in that deep hierarchy, a real pain. And maintenance, just managing permissions and navigation across tons of subsites, got super complex. That's really what the modern structure aims to fix.
Which is the modern, flat, and interconnected way, the big shift.
Yeah, designed for flexibility, scalability, better user experience fitting how work happens now. The core idea is one site collection per distinct thing. One team, one site collection, one project, one site collection.
So ditch the nesting. Every major work unit gets its own top-level space.
Pretty much. That's the flat site architecture. It simplifies managing permissions because each site is independent. Way easier to scale, just add another site. Doesn't break anything else. No complicated inheritance chains to worry about.
And you bring order to this flat world using
Hub sites, exactly. They connect these independent sites. They provide the organization and navigation that the hierarchy used to, but you can easily associate or disassociate sites as things change. Much more adaptable.
And the basic building blocks are still those modern communication sites and team sites.
Right. Plus, this modern setup integrates way better with the rest of Microsoft 365 Teams is a huge one. Planner, OneDrive. You get that real-time co-authoring people expect now.
Yeah, essential.
And the whole user experience is better responsive design, easier interface, web parts, improved search that uses AI, plus better tools for governance like site lifecycle management and compliance features built in.
So summing up the benefits: flexibility, user empowerment, better performance.
Those are the highlights in the material. But it's not magic. There are new challenges too.
Such as?
Well, governance needs a rethink. If it's easier for people to create sites, you need clear policies on provisioning, naming, when sites get archived. How do you maintain some consistency?
Right, potential sprawl.
Exactly. And training is key. Users need to understand how to navigate and work in this hub-connected model, and admins need to learn how to manage it effectively.
So it's really a move from a rigid tree structure to a more dynamic network.
That's a great way to put it. From centralized hierarchy to distributed sites connected by flexible hubs.
Okay, another reflection point for you listening. Considering the pros and cons of classic versus modern structures, where do you see the biggest potential benefit or maybe the biggest hurdle for your organization in adopting, or maybe further adopting, that flatter architecture? All right, final major section from the course material: SharePoint permissions and security. Can't build anything without getting this right.
Absolutely foundational. The material starts with the two core pillars, authentication and authorization.
Auth-N and Auth-Z, basically. Authentication is proving you are who you say you are.
Exactly. Usually happens via your Windows login, tied back to Active Directory. The system checks your credentials, verifies it's you.
And authorization is what you're allowed to do once it knows who you are.
Spot on. After you're authenticated, authorization determines what resources, sites, libraries, files you actually have permission to access. It's the allow or deny part.
Got it. Identity check, then access check.
That's the flow. Inside SharePoint, permissions manage that access. The material mentions the standard permission levels like full control, edit, read. These are just bundles of specific rights.
And you usually assign these levels using groups, not individuals.
Generally, yes. SharePoint groups are the classic way to manage this efficiently. Add users to a group, give the group permissions, saves a ton of time.
The material also mentioned fine-grained permissions.
Yeah, that's the ability to set unique permissions on individual items, like a single document or list item, overriding the permissions inherited from the library or site.
Powerful, but sounds like it could get messy fast.
Oh, it can.
Yeah.
Use with caution. The material also distinguishes between user types, internal and external.
Internal users, employees, people inside the company, usually licensed.
Right. External users, these are people outside your org, like partners or clients, who you grant access to specific things. They don't need a full license. This is done via external sharing.
And enabling that external sharing. It's not just a site-level thing.
Crucial point the material makes. No, it has to be turned on at the very top, at the overall SharePoint organization level by a global admin first. Only then can individual site owners choose to enable it for their specific site.
So a top-down control for sharing outside. Makes sense. Now, managing permissions, it feels different between classic and modern SharePoint, especially around groups.
It really does. In classic sites, you primarily worked with individuals, SharePoint groups, or maybe Active Directory security groups.
Standard stuff.
Right. But with modern SharePoint, especially modern team sites, there's a big new player, Microsoft 365 groups.
Okay, explain how M365 groups fit into SharePoint permissions.
So a Microsoft 365 group isn't just for SharePoint. It's a membership group that underlies a whole set of tools. A shared Outlook inbox and calendar, a planner plan, a OneNote notebook, often a team in Microsoft Teams, and a connected SharePoint team site.
So it's the membership layer for a suite of tools.
Exactly. When you add someone to that M365 group, they automatically get permissions across all those connected resources, including becoming a member of the associated SharePoint site. The M365 group owners become site owners.
So for those modern team sites, managing the M365 group is managing the core site permissions.
Pretty much, yeah. For the main team members, it massively simplifies things for standard team collaboration. You can still use specific SharePoint groups inside that site for more granular access if you need to, but the M365 group handles the main membership.
Big change from the classic way. The material also gives a nod to the SharePoint Online Management Shell.
Yeah, the PowerShell interface for admins, it's essential for managing things that scale site collections, users, and especially complex permission scenarios across many sites. Bulk operations, reporting, configuring settings, often much faster and more powerful via script.
A must-have for serious admins then.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've got authentication, authorization, permission levels, SharePoint groups, AD groups. They're really important. M365 groups for modern sites, fine-grained permissions, layers upon layers. Given all that, where do you think the biggest challenge lies for organizations in practice? Is it giving people enough access to do their jobs, or is it locking things down too much, or just managing the complexity of it all to strike the right balance? What's your take for the listener?
Wow. Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground, completing our deep dive into Bemanda Technologies SharePoint Deep Dive course material.
Yeah, it's been a comprehensive look. We recapped the evolution in core admin in part 1. And this time, we really focused on the modern application. That shift to flat structures connected by hubs, how those enable powerful intranets using web parts and targeting, and the absolute necessity of getting permissions and security right, especially with M365 groups in the mix now.
We saw how hubs provide flexible structure, how web parts build engaging pages, and how authentication and authorization work together.
So here's the final thought to leave you with. As SharePoint keeps integrating deeper into Microsoft 365 and things like AI and automation become more prevalent, how do you think these fundamental concepts, structure, intranets as communication hubs, and security, how will they continue to adapt? Will AI start suggesting permissions or automatically organizing content, maybe making rigid structures less critical?
That's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? The material gives us the foundation, but the way AI interacts with this, it's bound to change how we manage it all, even if the core needs remain. Definitely something to watch.
Absolutely. So, reflecting on everything we've discussed from this course material, what's one thing that stands out to you? Something that might change how you approach